Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles, and I hope that you're having a great and wonderful day today. I am getting ready to see if I can set up our broadcast for Facebook. We're having just a little bit of technical difficulty with it, but let's see if we can get it going. Welcome, Kingdom 66. Lady Barbara, how are you today? If you know how to share this broadcast, I'm going to ask if you go ahead and share it out. It is Thinking Theology Thursday, and we have a lot of good stuff to cover, and I'm excited because I believe we're going to finish chapter 1 of about 3 books today, and we're going to get into another religion or another belief. All right, so I think it's going to do it this time. Let's see. All right, put that here, and let's hit the go live. This is on our Facebook channel, Daring Dialogue. So if you ever kind of have an issue with your Periscope, you can always go to our Facebook page, Daring Dialogues, and you can catch the video replays there as well. All right. Or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, which has a whole lot more goodies than what I'm sharing here on Periscope. There's music on there. There is sermons. There are guest speakers on our YouTube page. So if you're looking for more content, that's where it is. All right. Just want to let you know that. Also, I had a question about sponsorship or giving. If you would like to consider being someone who sponsors what we do at Daring Dialogues, either for giveaways or to promote your product, you can email me at reachshantae@gmail.com, and I will tell you how to go about that. All right. If you want to participate in the Super Hearts on Periscope, my Super Hearts are on, so you can feel free to drop some Super Hearts and get your comments and things highlighted. All right. So let's see. 3, 2, 1. All right, we are live on both Facebook and on Periscope this morning. So I want to welcome everybody that's coming in. I actually have not checked my numbers for when we're doing Periscope Live. So I didn't realize that we're actually increasing in our viewership because I just haven't been paying attention to it. But I want to say thank you to those who are watching in Periscope inside the app, and also those of you who are watching by Twitter, those of you who are watching through your computer. I know if you're watching through your computer, you probably can't comment, but I always welcome people to tell me what they think about the show. So you, again, can feel free to email me at reachshantae@gmail.com if you have a show topic that you'd like to be addressed, or you have a question, or you simply want to leave a comment and tell me how I'm doing. You can reach me there. I will warn you that I don't read hate mail. I actually take your name and I just start praying for you and I say, God, handle it. So if you dislike this show and you don't want God to be on your doorstep because I asked him to talk to you, you probably don't want to send me hate mail, all right? Because that's what I'm going to do with it. Now, if you're a hater who's a secret admirer and you really need some prayer, then you send me hate mail, because that's what's going to happen with it, okay? I'm going to take your name and I'm going to pray for you. And I'm going to say, God, this person is a secret admirer and they just don't know it yet. They don't know me well enough to realize that they actually like what I'm doing. All right. So, yeah, that's how I handle that. All right. So let's get into our books today. Today we're coming with Why So Many Gods? The Essence of Jesus. Silence, A Christian History, and we're going to look at finishing up chapter 1 of Kingdom Marriage. Kingdom Marriage. So let's see. Why so many gods? Let's go there first. All right. The religion that we're going to cover today is Taoism. Taoism. And I'll show you the graphic for that. Everybody can see that, surely, hopefully. All right. Most people know it as the yin yang, but we're going to talk a little bit about that symbol within Taoism. So the short history is, little is known about the founder of Taoism. Welcome, Pastor Ben. Little is known about the founder of Taoism. Some say he was born in 604 BC. Others say 570 BC. Some say he was born old with white hair and a long beard and wrinkly old skin. Others say his mom named him Plum Tree Ears because he was born, good morning, he was born under a plum tree and had long ears. Imagine trying to get a date with a name like that. But his followers just called him Lao Tzu, old philosopher. So I know in a lot of the coaching circles, in a lot of the, how can I put it? Coaching circles, self-improvement circles, empowerment circles that are not necessarily Christian, you will hear them quote Lao Tzu a lot. Okay, so let's see a little bit more about him. Apparently, he worked for the Chinese government as a curator of the imperial archives. But soon, Lao Tzu was disgusted with the mean rulers and the idea of government itself, so he quit. He believed men should live simple lives without hierarchy of honor and without trying to gain a bunch of knowledge. This idea was pretty cool to a lot of people, so he began to have followers because of his ideas. So to get away from the fame, he tried to leave the city, but at the border, the guards wouldn't let him pass. They told him that his teachings were so great that he had to write them down to share with others, and until then, he could not pass. So Lao goes home and spends 3 days writing all he knows. He comes out with a little book called the Tao Te Ching, or The Way and Its Power. All right. So a lot of times you see people quoting from Tao Te Ching. No one is sure what happened to him. One story says that he got on the back of a water buffalo and rode off into the sunset, never to be seen again. Another says that the guard read the little book and decided to go with him. Either way, no one ever saw him again. So what are some of their basic beliefs? Taoists do not focus on life after death. Instead, they work out practical ways to live as long as they can so they can be immortal. Here are a few of their beliefs. The Tao literally means the way or path. It is the way of the universe, the way one should organize their life. You get there by practicing Wu Wei, which literally means inaction. Just think about that for a moment. We must avoid all aggression by doing things that are natural and spontaneous. We should live passively, avoiding all stress and violence. Well, gee, isn't that nice? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we all could live passively, avoiding all stress and violence? Yeah, this religion, tell that to Black Americans. The yin and the yang. You've seen it on clothes, skateboards, necklaces, that kind of stuff. But basically, the yin-yang symbol represents the tension between good, which is yin, and bad, which is yang, things in the world. It goes a little something like this. Yin-yang. Yin would be male, yang would be female. So that means, according to this, females are what's bad in the world. Okay? Wrong religion for me. Positive, negative, good, evil, light, dark, life, and death. In Taoism, yin and yang are positive and negative principles of the universe. One cannot exist without the other, and they often represent opposites. As you have more and more yang, eventually yin will appear and balance it out, and vice versa. As you travel around the world, as you travel around the circle, white or black will increase until the opposite color is almost gone, but never totally gone. The cycle then repeats for the opposite color. Wu Wei literally means without action. It is one of the main concepts from Taoism. It means that you make something look easy so that it seems like you're not having to work hard at doing something. Welcome, Prophet Jonathan. By following Wu Wei, you are closely following the way. I wonder where the way, the truth, and the life. Sounds familiar. The path of how you should organize your life. Wonder where those concepts came from. Harmony. Harmony can only be achieved by looking at the world turned upside down. Acts 17:6b. Governing. The governing should follow the way in governing the people as well. Specific chapters in the Tao Te Ching describe the ideal way of governing people. Good morning, Prophet Jonathan. They can be summarized in these key points. All right. Do not emphasize status, intelligence, or possessions. Govern with the least amount of visibility and with a serving attitude. Reduce laws and govern lightly. Take few actions that involve the people. Treat other countries non-aggressively. 3 characteristics that Taoists cherish: compassion, which leads to courage; moderation, which leads to generosity; humility, which leads to leadership. The followers are called Taoists or Daoists. How does one become one? By believing that what they say is true. What's the attraction? Trying to keep peace with everyone. What's the goal? To become one with the Tao. How does it look like Christianity? They have some of the same morals like peace and love. How is it different from Christianity? Definitely it's different because there's a denial of God, and in some, just reading, a denial of reality. They deify people but don't believe in God. So, they don't deify God. They don't have a particular God. Their figurehead is Lao Tzu and Chang Tzu. For the afterlife, they focus on achieving immortality. But if they do die, they return to the Tao. Their worldview is atheistic. Their sacred text is Tao Te Ching, or The Way and Its Power, a book that says government should rule by non-action. Worship services are in a temple. Rituals, rites, and sacraments. Death. When a middle-class Chinese person dies, they are given a 3-day funeral with Taoist dancers. They do different things to make sure the person doesn't get held up with the gods, their ancestors, on their way to heaven, like burn a death certificate and play music. Did you know Taoist priests invented Kung Fu thousands of years ago because they weren't allowed to carry weapons? Geographic center is in Taiwan. Number of followers is 20 million worldwide at this printing, 30,000 in the USA, and I'm sure that has probably increased. Important vocabulary: Tao, which means transcendent or immanent, and Ti, which is efficient. Example of beliefs in our popular culture: Tai Chi. You're seeing it everywhere lately. Commercials, health clubs, etc. It's a Taoist method for good health. It's about controlling your breath, purifying it, and helping your body in the process. Another breathing exercise related to a spiritual belief. This is why I tell people, be careful what kind of exercises you're participating in, because the West always separates people's faith from exercise. But the spirit behind it is still there. Celebrity: Christian Bale, the actor, has been trained in Tai Chi. The trick: Taoism is about becoming deified and achieving immortality. Blink, blink. Basically, Taoists place the notion of a God on themselves. rather than submitting to the authority of the one true God, the creator of their souls. All right? So, the goal is for you to become the deity and become immortal. How's that working out for us? All right. The essence of Jesus. We're getting back into our discussion about Christ, who he was, why can we trust these sources, and last we started talking about how they came up with the four gospels. Why are there four gospels in the New Testament? And we began to talk about the concept of the canon. Okay. And then today we're going to talk about how are the four gospels to be used. All right. So I want to reiterate what a canon is. We're not talking about cannons as in shooting cannons, right? That's not the kind of canon we're talking about. The word canon here is meant as a measuring rod or rule, and came to be used of an authoritative list of books by which to measure one's faith. Before there were such lists of books, there were creeds or statements of faith which were used as tests. Remember, last time we talked about the apostles' creeds, or the creeds that the believers would have to learn to be able to express what it was they believed to other Christians or to other people of faith. And they would say, okay, yeah, we believe the same thing. We can hang, we can chill out together. We can fellowship together. I'm in fellowship with you because we share the same creed. All right. So they would go around, and if somebody were trying to figure out if they were a believer or not, these creeds were things that they would recite. All right. As confirmation that, yes, I too am a believer. So, how are the four gospels to be used? There's a problem posed by clear differences between these gospels, and yet also some striking similarities, particularly between the first three, which have a common, or what they call, synoptic view. They're called the synoptic gospels. All right, so they have a synoptic or common view of Jesus. These three are sometimes set out in parallel columns in a synopsis so that the similarities and differences can be clearly seen. If you have a really good study Bible, some study Bibles have this chart in the back so you can see this whole thing that he's talking about here with the synoptics. This is known as the synoptic problem. Various solutions have been proposed, including the idea that all four gospels draw on common oral tradition, which they use selectively in different ways, or that one of the gospels was adapted by the other three evangelists in different ways. In the early church, an attempt was made to replace the four gospels with one in which the evidence from the four was woven together into one account. Tatian's, the citation here is Tatian's circa 150. This version was rejected by Irenaeus in his work against heresies. For 17 centuries, Matthew was regarded as the first gospel to have written. It supplied the framework, shape, and color to the church's image of Christ. But by the end of the 19th century, Mark was preferred and has remained the favorite as the earliest gospel ever since. In the 20th century, most gospel studies fragmented the four gospels. They were treated like mosaics, which were broken up with a view to one day making a truer picture. Things changed in the second half of the century, and attention shifted to treating each gospel as a whole. It is now generally recognized that we have four portraits of Christ, which are complementary accounts. But to understand the story they tell from a responsible and historical point of view, we need to have some acquaintance with the historical context of the events they relate. All right? So let's talk about the context of the first century world. What was going on in the Roman world at the time? What was going on in the Jewish world at the time? And what was happening with other religions at the time? All right? The Roman world. Jesus was born into a world dominated, listen, by the Roman Empire. Okay? Octavian had founded the empire in 27 BCE when a grateful Senate rewarded him for ending the civil war and establishing the Roman peace in which trade and prosperity could flourish. They gave him the right to command the legions and honored him with the title Augustus, meaning one to be revered. The empire was divided into provinces administered by governors and client kings. The latter were either existing kings who agreed to serve the emperor or people appointed by Rome. Jesus lived his short life in the province of Syria, an imperial province on the eastern borders of the empire, where Roman legions were stationed to defend those borders. Within the province were various client kings, such as Herod the Great, until 4 BCE, and then his kingdom was divided between his sons Archelaus, Herod Antipas, and Herod Philip. Jesus' public ministry was conducted in Galilee in the territory of Herod Antipas, and in Judea under Pontius Pilate, one of the Roman governors who had replaced Archelaus. I'm probably saying that wrong. It's probably Archelaus. It is not surprising to find Jesus meeting a Roman centurion or tax collectors, Jews who were working for the occupying power, and rebels who wanted to fight for Jewish freedom. Okay? From a Jewish world perspective, Jesus was a Jew or a Hebrew, and he lived and worked among Jews. So it was important to know something about Judaism in the first century. The center of the Jewish world was Jerusalem, and the city known in their holy scriptures as the city of God. Here, until 70 CE, was the temple. Herod the Great had begun an extensive rebuilding program in 19 BCE, which was not completed until 64 CE. This was the temple which the disciples pointed out to Jesus in Mark 13, verse 1. It was where the daily sacrifices were carried out by the priests, and the center for the 3 annual festivals of Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, during which the Jews congregated in the city in vast numbers. The spiritual heart of Judaism was the Torah, the law, and in the law, the oneness of God and the command to love God wholeheartedly as set out in the Shema, which means to hear. It is the first word of Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 5, where it says, Shema Israel, the Lord your God is one, meaning the Lord your God is united, the Lord your God is unified, the Lord your God is one God. Whatever their differences, Jews were united in their belief that the one God had committed himself to their ancestors and therefore to them in a covenant at Mount Sinai in the time of Moses. There was also an oral law which taught how the written law was to be applied to the daily details of life. This oral law is called the traditions of the elders in the Gospels, okay? So the traditions of the elders was the oral law, and the oral law was supposed to be interpreting the written law or the 10 Commandments. It was neither simple nor agreed, and Jews were divided into different groups according to their response to the oral law. They also differed in their attitudes to the Roman occupation. So, if you think things like people disagreeing on what the scriptures actually mean or what the law actually means, and therefore they divide up into different sects, if you think that is only an American Christian issue, surprise! Oh, this has been going on for a long time. All right? They also differed in their attitudes to the Roman occupation. The Jews did. Okay? Many longed for God to act and fulfill his promises through the prophets, to send a great king like David, a Messiah, to deliver the people and make a restored Israel the center of the world. Sounds like America 2017. Others were nervous about anything that might disturb the status quo in which they had vested interests. Sounds again like 2017. We meet most of these groups of people in the Gospels. The vast majority, 90%, were the people of the land who resented taxation and being conscripted for service. But they welcomed the peace and security which the Romans brought. Perhaps they dreamed of independence. The Pharisees were a small party, only about 6,000 out of a population of 1 to 2 million. Most of them lived in Judea, in or near Jerusalem. They tried to observe and teach the law in all its details. They had a saying that if all the people kept to the law, for one day the Messiah would come. They looked for God's intervention to deliver them from Rome. The Sadducees were an even smaller group than the Pharisees. These were members of wealthy aristocratic families of Jerusalem, and many of them were the priests. Their policy was cooperation with the Romans in order to maintain the status quo and practice the temple cults, which they thought essential to preserving a good relationship between God and his people. Sounds like the evangelicals right now. The Essenes are not mentioned in the New Testament, but are known from Josephus, the Jewish historian, and Philo, the biblical scholar. They had even stricter rules than the Pharisees and generally lived in communities with carefully controlled contacts from the outside world. We might see them as similar maybe to the Amish, all right? Most scholars identify the community at Qumran, down by the Dead Sea, with the Essenes. They had withdrawn, not in protest against the Romans, but this community withdrew from society in protest against the Jewish leaders, who they thought had sold out to contemporary fashions and culture. Finally, there were the revolutionary terrorists or freedom fighters, sometimes referred to as zealots, with whom Jesus is occasionally identified. They were responsible for several outbreaks of revolution, culminating in the War of 66 to 73 CE. We might call them, I don't know, maybe I don't want to say Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter is not responsible for outbreaks of revolution, all right? But just think about it. This was the world that Jesus was presenting the gospel in, all right? So there were already factions going on. They were fighting for equality. They were fighting for fair representation in government. They were fighting for not being, taxed and all of this other stuff. And then, of course, their own religious ideologies. So think about it. That's just 4 right there. You've got the Pharisees, you've got the Sadducees, you've got the Essenes, that's the isolated community of believers, and you've got the zealots, all right, who may have been believers, but they were like, we're gonna take this over by force, all right. So you already had 4 different ideologies going on at the same time that the people of the land would have been familiar with. And Jesus comes on the scene and he's like, I ain't with none of them. Yeah, I can see how that would probably be a problem. I could see how all 4 of those groups, maybe not the Essenes because they were pretty isolated, but I could see how 3 of those groups would benefit from saying, let's get rid of Jesus. We've already got our own issues going, and then he has the nerve to come in here, acting like he's going to save the day. He has the nerve to come in and swoop down talking about he the son of God. What? I can see how they could have a problem with that. Jesus was frequently found in synagogues, local centers for Jewish meeting, worship, and education. The ruler of the synagogue was usually a prominent, wealthy member of the congregation who took on responsibility for the upkeep of the building and played a part in the ordering of the events that took place there. There were synagogues all over Palestine and in most of the cities of the Roman Empire. And lastly, other religions. So think about it. You got those four issues going on just within the Hebrew people. Okay? Then step into the Roman world and you've got all this other stuff going on, all at the same time. The culture of the Roman world was one impregnated with Greek ideas, language, philosophy, and religion. Still trying to figure out how, if you're African, that you're pledging yourself to Greek gods. I'm still trying to figure that one out. Nobody has explained that one to me yet. There was a growing skepticism about the ability of traditional gods to save human beings and society. There was an increasing cynicism and a darkness of spirit. Some people looked to the mystery religions for salvation. Others were resigned to making the best of life as it came, well aware of their limitations in the face of what they call the fates. The mysteries were secret societies, whose foundation myths were derived from the natural cycle of the year. They offered their followers deliverance from disaster, futility, and death. There were different versions, such as the cult of Isis, based on an Egyptian story of the god Osiris, a dying and rising god linked to the rise and fall of the Nile, or the Greek god Dionysus of Asia Minor, who was associated with the fermentation of wine and the fertility of the earth. Participation in sacred meals united the worshiper with the god in death and life. This then was the world into which Jesus was born, when Emperor Augustus sent out an edict for a general registration for taxation purposes, an edict which led Joseph and Mary to leave Nazareth and make their way to Bethlehem because Joseph was of the Davidic line. This was the world in which Jesus began his public ministry. As Luke puts it, in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. So they're telling us this is the period that Jesus was born into. In many ways, it is a world foreign to us, and it helps us to approach the people we meet if we try to see the world through their eyes. 21st century perspectives. So as we go further into this book, think about this. It is also important to be aware of the worldviews we bring to our reading. In this first decade of the 21st century, there are still many people who think like the theologian David Strauss, people for whom the world is a closed system of cause and effect, and for whom all explanations have to be given in terms of that system. They translate any language about God and his dealings with people into the languages of psychology, anthropology, and even astronomy. So, for example, the late Francis Crick, who lived from 1916 to 2004, one of the three scientists awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for discovering the structure of DNA, could only account for the origin of life on Earth by reference to extraterrestrial invasion. But during the last years of the 20th century, a renewed interest in spirituality has encouraged people to attend to signals of a reality beyond our empirical senses. There is also an increasing realization that globally, more people live by faith in something bigger than themselves and their everyday concerns. This may help us to be ready to suspend our skepticism and allow people from other ages to tell us how they saw Jesus. All right? So next week we're going to come back and we will start by looking at Jesus in the Gospels. Jesus in the Gospels. And I do believe we are good, about at the halfway mark, so let's keep going. And we are back in our book, Silence, A Christian History. And let's look at the suffering servant. Last time we talked about how even in Scripture there's this balance between silent contemplation, right, of the divine with the speech of human worshipers. and we looked at Psalm 19 verse 14, where it shows the balance, and it says, let the words of my mouth, which would be audible, and the meditation of my heart, which is not audible, be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. So now let's take a look at this issue of the suffering servant, or the one who suffers in silence. Another voice from the Tanakh was in the long term equally transformative of the status of silence in that offshoot of Judaism which became Christianity. It is what might be termed a minority report on silence from the second prophet included in the book of Isaiah, who was writing just after Cyrus, king of Persia, had allowed the Babylonian exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. In the midst of the pronouncements which have come to be known as the Songs of the Suffering Servant, Isaiah says of this man of peace, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is dumb. This text of Isaiah is very close to a description by the earlier prophet Jeremiah of his own sufferings, where he says, but I was like a gentle lamb led to the slaughter. I did not know it was against me they devised schemes. The commentator Klaus Bautzer points out the one feature of Isaiah's song which is unprecedented. It says, the only unusual thing about the servant's behavior is his silence. Although Jeremiah had inspired Isaiah's passage and perhaps the whole suffering servant motif, it is the later prophet who has then added the thought about dumbness. A near echo of it is the opening of one of the most remarkable and individual of the Psalms, Psalm 39. Where the singer recalls a state of dumb distress before addressing prayer and praise to God. I said, I will guard my ways that I may not sin with my tongue. I will bridle my mouth so long as the wicked are in my presence. I was dumb and silent. I held my peace to no avail. My distress grew worse. My heart became hot within me. The singer then emphasizes that words have only come to him through God's mercy, and he rehearses his patient submission to God, which is reminiscent of that of the servant, who says, I am dumb, I do not open my mouth, for it is thou who hast done it. When the singer of Psalm 39 does open his mouth, he speaks of the brevity of human life and how it fades into nothingness. His tone of resignation comes close to the wintry smile at human folly that we encounter in the book of that most disconcerting of teachers, Ecclesiastes, where the theme of God's silence has become a criticism of the capacity of wisdom literature to say anything ultimately useful or meaningful about God. Christianity, not a religion to appreciate anticlimax, has never found it easy to deal with that fading away from the busy sound of human life and the chatter of human knowledge which emerges at the end of the text, with its bleak picture of humanity sinking into old age. If anybody has read Ecclesiastes 12, matter of fact, I was just sharing that this week. Ecclesiastes 12 talks about old age. It talks about serving God now while you have the energy, the youth, the strength, the vigor, right? And so that book ends, as he says here, with this picture of humanity and old age in a series of metaphors like the failing of your physical faculties in the day, as it says, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men are bent and the grinders cease because they are few, meaning your teeth. And those that look through the windows are dimmed. That's he's talking about your eyesight dimming. And the doors on the street are shut, and the sound of the grinding is low. All that can follow is death, expressed in more metaphors. The silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is broken at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. All of those, by the way, in case you didn't know what that meant, all of those are metaphors of the spirit or the soul leaving the body. Okay? Then all is vanity, the end of the matter, all has been heard. The second Isaiah, who was writing in much the same era, after the return of exiles from Babylon to Israel, draws a different, more positive message from silence. The returned people of Israel were doing their best to restore the ravished temple, painfully recovering from the trauma of defeat, destruction, and exile, and debating how this experience might relate to God's purposes. They found in the second prophet's poetry an image of silence which not only reflected their own terrible experience, but looked forward in hope and restoration. Over the next centuries, successive generations first applied this message to their continuing sufferings as a community. Then some began to see the silent suffering servant as an individual, perhaps the anointed one or Messiah who would save Israel. That was to prove an image of crucial importance for Christian self-identity, and silence was to be a vital part of that, as we will see below. Silence, Plato, and the Creator God. The role of silence in Jewish tradition steadily expanded as the boundaries of what were to be considered particularly authoritative or canonical sacred texts gradually became fixed into the Tanakh, a process which, as we have observed, was probably completed in the 1st century BCE. Alongside that development, there built up from the late 3rd century to the 1st century CE another literature which was a conscious meditation on or enrichment of this canon. A great number of these texts survive, many of which take on the guise of much older figures found in the Tanakh, to emphasize their own authority as revealing God's purpose, the message in new ways. Hence, their group description as apocalyptic, from the Greek apokalypto, unveil or reveal. They have often been discussed by Christians under the loaded title of intertestamental literature, works falling between what Christians call the Old and the New Testaments, clearly not a term which has any meaning within the Jewish tradition. The background to this literature was not merely Judaism's continuing conversation with its troubled past as pictured in the Tanakh, but a new dialogue with an outside culture, in this case Greek, mediated by Hellenistic monarchs who had been generals in Alexander the Great's armies and their successors. Over a century, from the late 4th century BCE, these new rulers turned Alexander's fleeting conquests into empires. They battled for control of the Jewish heartland on their common frontier. Some of the cultural conversation between Judaism and Hellenism became extremely violent, as when in the 2nd century BCE, the boastful Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes tried forcefully to impose Greek values on his Jewish subjects and instead provoked a successful rebellion against his rule in the establishment of the Jewish Hasmonean kingdom. The lure of Greek philosophy and intellectual inquiry was nevertheless too strong for consistent intellectual resistance on the part of the Jews. Not only did the Alexandrian Jewish community feel it essential to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, the great translation known as the Septuagint, but Jewish intellectuals sifted through a mass of Greek terminology in order to make sense of their tradition in Greek forms. Okay? Much of the process remains obscure, and the era on the eve of the birth of Jesus is particularly difficult to understand, despite various manuscript discoveries of the last 100 years. The problem is not confined to Judaism, as one historian of silence in the Greek tradition remarks. The last century before Christ conceals many mysteries from the intellectual historian. Many of the apocalyptic books are far more hospitable than the Tanakh itself to a positive notion of silence. Within them, the contours of Jewish religion can be seen changing and diversifying, and new themes emerging. Judaism in the 3 centuries before the Common Era was extremely diverse, not least because it was becoming dispersed way beyond its homeland throughout the Mediterranean and the Middle East, one significant new development can be perceived in Jewish sacred literature of the period. A view of God as much more withdrawn from this world than had once been common in Israel thought. Perhaps this conclusion was natural, given the baffling nature of Yahweh's interaction with his people, constantly providing new disasters to endure and new tyrannies, such as that of Antiochus Epiphanes, for Israel to overcome. In any event, it was encouraged by Judaism's increasing dialogue with Greek culture, which culminated in the work of the great Jewish scholar Philo of Alexandria, an older contemporary of Jesus. Plato had influenced various strands of Greek thought to conceive of one supreme and very remote divine being, beyond and above the traditional Greek pantheon and beyond being itself. Echoing through the mind of any Hellenistic Jew with a claim to education, let alone in the writings of Philo, would be some of Plato's classic observations. In the Republic, he said that the good itself is not essence, but still transcends essence in dignity and surpassing power. And in the Timaeus, that to discover the maker and father of this universe were a task indeed, and having discovered him, to declare him unto all men were a thing impossible. This last observation resonated with the central devotional concern of Israel's religion in the restored Temple of Jerusalem. It seems to have been in the period after the restoration that the sacred name Yahweh, represented in scriptural texts by its 4 Hebrew letters, Yod, Ha, Wa, and He, Yod, Ha, Va, and He, known as the Tetragrammaton in Greek, ceased to be pronounced in speech and became a written word only. So people say Yah-He, Va-He. Alluded to in the spoken word through a great number of circumlocutions, not merely in Hebrew, but later also in the related Middle Eastern languages called Aramaic and in the Jewish use of Greek. The temple was now commonly regarded as the dwelling place, not so much of God, but of his name. This idea can already be found in the books of the Tanakh, composed before the fall of Jerusalem, in the period of so-called Deuteronomistic reform, promoted from the reign of King Josiah of Judah, which concentrated Jewish practice on the temple. Alexandrian Greeks in particular emphasized the distance which most Jews ought to feel from the pronunciation of the divine name. Its successor was the Septuagint, which was the Greek word Kyrios, or Lord, used in an absolute way, not as a descriptor for some other divine name such as Zeus. All right? As Philo meditated and commented on the Hebrew scriptures, the God of Israel was for him almost nameless. So for thoughtful Jews, particularly those living in a Greek society, a Hellenistic environment, God dwelt more constantly in the highest heaven, and it was more likelier than earlier centuries that his messengers, angels, or spirits would be employed to bring his commands to humanity, speaking in their own voices. Any human encounter with him on the part of the apocalyptic writers was liable to involve a journey through complicated heavenly courts. By the 1st century BCE, when the Hasmonean monarchy was decaying, God's household was very commonly as much as sevenfold in structure, appropriate to the perception that his royal throne was even more remote than those of the pharaohs or the kings. Much later, apocalyptic literature in the era, contemporary with the first Christians, dispensed with any possibility of human journeys into heaven. In a text probably composed about the time of the final fall of Jerusalem in 770 CE, 2nd Esdras 8:21 is frank in his view of the remoteness of God, whose throne is beyond measure and whose glory is beyond comprehension. So I want to pause right there because I know I have read a lot. But what they're talking about is as the Hebrews began to mix in some of the Hellenistic beliefs Their idea of God being a personal God. Their idea of God being one who speaks. Their idea of people taking journeys into heaven and all of these essential ideas you kind of see in the Old Testament, they began to move further and further and further and further away from these ideas, and they began to take on a more Hellenistic view, as they said, seeing God more distant from the people. All right? So just keep that in mind. Where once the silence of God had been a matter for misery and loud complaint, now it was seen as just the way things were. For even if God were silent, he still disclosed himself to his creation. So did the ultimate God proposed by Plato. Philo happily took up another frequent Greek usage in the Septuagint, logos, to conceive of a firstborn logos, a word, reason, or discourse, who was the beginning and the name of God, and who was to be perceived throughout the Tanakh. This was the form in which God disclosed himself, and Philo could see it as uniting God's inherent sovereignty and goodness in a form which significantly for Christians reading him could be seen in terms of threeness. While indeed God is one, his highest and chiefest powers are two, even goodness and sovereignty. Through his goodness he begat all that is. Through his sovereignty he rules what he has begotten. And in the midst between the two there is a third which unites them, reason, logos, for it is through reason that God is both ruler and good. Philo would not have been ignorant of Plato's discussion of the good, or how much logos resembled the world soul in Plato's Timaeus, the first intelligence created to suffuse the world and make it intelligible, sufficing unto itself as acquaintance and friend. And because of all of this, he generated it to be a blessed God. Yet for a Jew, a concentration on logos also reflected the way in which the sacred name Yahweh was no longer pronounced in Jewish religious life, or if it was, only in the specifically privileged setting of the temple. This new emphasis on word was a fruitful theme taken up by Christians after Philo, particularly through the evangelist John, just as they also seized on the word Kyrios to describe their Messiah, Jesus. Philo was setting a wider new direction in philosophy. For him, silence had much to convey about the sacred, as did speech. Each had its own virtue. Reason might recognize that in some circumstances, were it possible to speak, that moment was nevertheless not appropriate. The two creation stories of Genesis 1 and 2 positively invited creative rethinking on the part of their readers, as Jewish commentators strove to draw out their contrasting messages and enrich their brevity. There was an understandable interest in the priestly account of God resting on the seventh day, which the original story itself clearly intended as an etiology of the Sabbath rest, and as an emphasis on the primeval holiness of this distinctive institution of the Jewish people. The implication of the account was, as we have seen, that the seventh day was more than a withdrawal. It continued in some sense the work of creation. The keeping of the Sabbath on earth, which was an exclusive privilege of the Jews, mirrored its observance in heaven. So says the Jewish Book of Jubilees, probably written at the end of the 3rd century BCE. All the angels of the presence and all the angels of holiness, these two great classes, he has commanded us to keep the Sabbath with him in heaven and on earth. Them alone on earth did he allow to eat and drink and keep Sabbath on it. Silence had not appeared explicitly in either of the two original creation accounts, which contrariwise had so emphasized speech, but now the idea of silence in creation began to make its appearance in apocalyptic literature. Consider Second Ezra, 639, written 2 centuries or so after Jubilees, and not improbably contemporary with Philo's discussions of silence. It elaborates on the primeval darkness and formlessness before creation to add a new element to the description. The Spirit was hovering, and darkness and silence embraced everything. If one read the priestly account of creation with this extension of the text in mind, then there was a correspondence in the act of creation. It began in formless silence as the Spirit hovered, but on the Sabbath it ended in restful silence of a world fully formed and structured. A silence which Psalm 19 might be said to describe as the heavens told the glory of God without the aids of words or speech. Small wonder that such a satisfactory symmetry seized the imagination of both Jews and early Christians. There could be no greater symbol of holiness than the Sabbath, and so the concept of the holiness of silence, which had been such a minority voice, began to be reinforced in these texts. Out of this pairing of primeval and Sabbath silence, and their pairing in both earth and heaven, a potent idea was arising amidst the flux of Jewish religious thought. One passage in 2nd Esdras describes the conversation between the prophet Ezra and God's angel. The angel in this instance sounds very much as though it is the direct mouthpiece of God, and she or he turns to what will happen after the Messiah has come. After these years, my son, in some versions, the Messiah shall die, and all who draw human breath, and the world shall be turned back to primeval silence for 7 days, as it was at the first beginnings, so that no one shall be left. And after 7 days the world, which is not yet awake, shall be roused, and that which is corruptible shall perish. And the earth shall give up those who are asleep in it, and the dust those who dwell silently in it. And the chambers shall give up the souls which have been committed to them, and the Most High shall be revealed upon the seat of judgment. In this extended picture of the last things, the end of time is a recapitulation of creation. The universe returns to its original silence, but then in the end, after the 7th day of this revisiting of the first age, all silences come to an end. In this scheme, silence has become a period of transition on the way to God's final judgment. This passage in 2nd Esdras is by no means the only text of this period to reveal a fascination with the return to silence. Some of these have remained apocryphal to all present-day religious traditions, but not all of them. Some proclaim the fulfillment of this messianic hope and were destined to form a new canon alongside the Tanakh for a newly constructed universal religion. They will lead us on the adventure out of Judaism, which took its name from the Messiah figure portrayed in that text, the Christian faith. So he's making an interesting point here that eventually they want to put together a new canon alongside the Tanakh. I hope y'all heard that. For a newly constructed universal religion that will lead you out of just believing Judaism, that will lead you into one world religion. Pretty interesting. I hope you all have a few minutes to give me. I know it is right at 12 o'clock, but I do want to finish this section of kingdom marriage. So if you will bear with me, give me about 10 minutes. I'll read this and then we'll close out. The Purpose of Marriage. Excellent book. It is a must get if you are in the kingdom, if you believe in family, marriage as God intended, and if you believe in a partnership in your marriage according to the Word of God. Because I do understand that all marriages are not equal, and I do understand that there are some how can I put it? There are some sections of the Christian faith, right? Some people in the Christian faith that do not believe in the equality of the woman in her marriage. Sad to say, but it is what it is. So if you believe in the co-heir and co-rulership that is supposed to happen in marriage, I would encourage you to get this book. The purpose of marriage. God established marriage in a perfect environment. In marriage, in fact, marriage came before sin. Let that sink in. He just dropped the bomb. Marriage came before sin. God created the first family and gave them his blessing, his commission, and his image. While Eve was yet in Adam, he did this. Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them, you know that word there that a lot of people just skip over, let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. So both parts are created in the image of God. I know I shouldn't have to explain this, but I am going to. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on earth. So if you're talking about, I want to get back to creation, God's intention, then God's intention was about them ruling. I know. You don't even have to say a word. I know what you're thinking. What do you mean? Her ruling too? That's not what I was taught. I know. But we're talking about original intentions of God. If we're going to talk about original intentions of God, we got to start here. As we see from the outset of this foundational passage on marriage, Adam and Eve were to reflect the triune image of God. Unity in the midst of diversity. An image mirrors that which it reflects. It doesn't add to, take away from, or distort. God created humanity as his mirror and called for that mirror to reproduce more mirrors through marriage. The marriage union is made up of male and female, most fully expresses who God truly is, and it is the most comprehensive manifestation of his image. Our goal as married couples is not only to mirror God in the visible realm, predicated on his reality in the invisible realm, but also to transfer the perfection of that image to our children as we raise kingdom kids. Simply put, the mission of marriage is to manifest and replicate the image of God in history, as well as carry out his divinely mandated dominion. Let them rule. Dominion essentially means ruling on God's behalf in history so that history comes underneath God's authority. The blessings God promised and that we so desire to experience in marriage were to be the outgrowth of men and women fulfilling God's purpose of reflecting his image and managing together his creation under his rule. Happiness is to be the benefit of a strong marriage, not the goal. The goal of marriage is to reflect God through the advancement of his kingdom on earth. Happiness occurs as an organic outgrowth when the goal is pursued. So yes, I know a lot of people think that marriage is about making them happy, when marriage is actually about reflecting Christ in the earth to people who don't know him. That's the first goal of marriage. Maybe that's why a whole lot of people are unhappy in it. I'm just saying. If you don't understand the goal of marriage, that is not just to please yourself, okay? It's not just to get your sexual fulfillment. The ultimate goal of marriage is to reflect Christ in the earth. And some people do it really well. You look at their marriage and you say, man, that is a picture of Christ. Christ loves us like that husband loves his wife. And the bride is supposed to love Christ like that wife submits to, serves, honors, cherishes, and is passionately committed to her husband. So when people see your marriage, hopefully they're supposed to be seeing a picture of Christ in how you respond and treat and love and serve one another. I know. The dominion of husband and wife. Let me see if I can finish. I don't think I'm going to be able to finish this section. I will just read to the end of this page and then I will stop. The dominion of husband and wife. In Genesis 1:28, God gave Adam and Eve the commission to rule. Understanding this passage is critical to the success of a kingdom marriage. To do so, let's look at the historical context within which the family was placed. God's creation of humanity came after the rebellion of Satan as a way of setting the human race to rule over God's created order. We see this in Psalm 8:3-6. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you take thought of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than God, and you crown him with glory and majesty. You make him to rule over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet. The commission to let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds, the cattle, all over the earth, was partnered with the command to subdue the earth. And in formal theology, this is referred to as dominion covenant. The backstory to this covenant was the rebellion of Satan against the kingdom of God, which resulted in the banishment of Satan and his fallen angels to earth prior to their permanent incarceration in hell. Humankind and the institution of marriage was specially created for people to have a relationship with God and each other that would result in a demonstration of God's superiority and his kingdom through humanity. This goal and the blessing connected to it could only be achieved in marriage. So if the marriage relationship operated according to his divine design, which explains why, get this, this is powerful. This is absolutely powerful. Which explains why Satan didn't attack Adam until he was married. I'm going to just take a sip. Which explains why, in many cases, those of you who are seeking to be married, those of you who are in serious courtship relationships, those of you who are getting engaged, all right, let me tell you, literally, like the week of me getting engaged, all of hell was unleashed on my marriage. Oh, yes. Within the week that I was engaged, I was accused of sexual relations with my fiance. They went to my bishop with the accusation. I had to be brought before, he was brought before the bishop. I was brought before a council of women, missionaries. And I was a couple of months away from doing my initial introduction into official, institutionalized ministry. I was already ministering. Okay. All this happened within like the first week I got engaged. Our relationship was immediately attacked. Immediately. That's how you know that you're onto something. When you know that you're doing what you're called to do, when you know that you're living righteous, when you know that you're living according to the word of God, and a full out launch comes against your character, that's when you ought to rejoice. I didn't feel like rejoicing at that moment. I wanted to, respond. But I was really, really hurt at first. I was like, I cannot believe. And it was people that was living with me. It wasn't like strangers. This was like a bald-faced lie. Because these young ladies that I was living with were upset that I didn't follow their instructions as to how I was going to conduct my engagement process. All right? They were upset because I wasn't taking their counsel, and I was going to take the counsel of the bishop. So guess what they did? They tried to sabotage my reputation and character so that I would not even get that opportunity to have counsel. Isn't that something? So Satan didn't attack Adam until he was married. God established a kingdom on earth that would rule over and defeat the kingdom of Satan. When Christ comes to create his millennial kingdom, it will be the final triumphant declaration of God's glory. Satan will be locked up during that time to reveal his ultimate defeat and judgment. Yet for now, God has issued a purpose for you and me, and for married couples especially, to harness and rule a part of his creation. Every person was created with that divine intent, and every marital union exists to pass down that intent to the next generation. In summary, the marriage relationship is to rule and replicate the image and kingdom of God in history. When God established the first family and gave them dominion to rule, he stated that he would not rule independently of them. Our decisions on earth would impact his decisions from heaven, Ephesians 3:10. God did this for one reason, to demonstrate to Satan and his minions that he can do more to manifest his glory through lesser creatures than through the once shining star. We often think that a battle is taking place between God and Satan these days, but there's no battle going on between them. No battle can exist truly between the Creator and the created one. And I'm going to stop there. I hope that you all have enjoyed this segment of Kingdom Marriage. We will continue next week, I believe, with the last part of chapter 1. But think about that. If you're a man, if you're a young man on here, I want you to think about the fact that the enemy did not attack Satan. The enemy did not attack Adam until after he was married. He did not try to challenge or come against their co-rulership until he got married. And if you look at what's going on in Christendom, I don't even have to call names. If you look right now at what's going on in Christendom, marriages are under attack. Pastors leaving their wives. Wives having affairs. Marriage is under attack. So what is he attacking really? He's attacking your dominion. He's attacking your ability to show dominion to the next generation. And unfortunately, some people cannot look past their own selfish purposes to see that you are literally impacting a whole nother generation by your choices. So, this is a daring dialogue. I know I went over a little bit today, but I want to at least make sure I got a little bit of the kingdom marriage in today. I may come back to it again, maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow, I want to do something different. with our broadcast, I want to do a Q&A. So if you have any questions, it's going to be an open broadcast tomorrow morning, which means I'm going to open up the conversation box and I'm going to allow everybody to converse and ask questions. So we may possibly get some trolls tomorrow, but I feel okay with doing a Q&A tomorrow. So if you have some questions and want to get some answers, I will have my little phone here. I won't do Daring Dialogues live. I won't do it on Facebook Live. I will have my phone ready so that if there's something that we need to look up really quickly or research, we can do it right in live time. All right, so we can provide you some answers. So tomorrow will be open Q&A, and hopefully if you all have some questions, we'll be able to get them answered on the segment. All right, so that will be tomorrow. It's probably, I think this is my first time doing an open Q&A. I think so. Yep, so we're going to do it. All right, and you all have been wonderful today. You all have been faithful Daring Dialoguers. I call you guys the We Dare Squad. So thank you, my We Dare Squad, for being in the house. Hope you will join me tomorrow morning. And on your end, just remember, if you see comments coming by, you always have the option of blocking and scroll and blocking people as they come in. So I think I've given you all permission to moderate comments. I'm going to go and check my settings after this to make sure that you all can also be moderators of our commentary on tomorrow. All right. So if you see somebody acting crazy, putting something up weird, you can block them by vote with Periscope, and we can just keep going and actually have a really good dialogue on tomorrow. All right. Thank you all for your time and attention. And remember, light is always the most daring opposition to darkness. Wherever there's darkness, bring the light. Take care and God bless.